Hello, it's time for another Man and Great book review. Today's book is I Heard God Talking to Me, William Edmondson and His Stone Carvings by Elizabeth Spires, published by FSG in 2009. It's 56 pages long. Before I talk about the book itself, let me give you a little background information about who William Edmondson was. William Edmondson was born on a plantation a few miles from Nashville in 1874. His parents were freed slaves, and as a boy, he worked doing manual labor on the plantation. He never went to school. He was illiterate for his entire life. And when he was about 16, he decided that he'd had enough of working on the plantation, and he traveled the 6 miles into Nashville and began doing a series of odd jobs. Eventually, he got a job working for the local Nashville railroad station. But then he was injured, and after that, he worked for a number of years as a janitor in a women's hospital in Nashville. Everything changed when he was 60 years old. In 1934, because he had a vision from God. He looked up and saw a tombstone in the sky, and he heard the voice of God telling him that he needed to carve tombstones out of limestone. And when he said to the voice that he didn't know how, the voice of God told him to do it anyway. So he began going to demolished buildings and digging out chunks of limestone from the foundation or from other parts of the building. And then he got a railroad spike and a hammer, and first began kind of crudely carving tombstones, but then over time he got better and better at it. And he began setting these carvings up in front of his house. He worked inside a garage. And over time he switched, he continued to do tombstones, but he also began carving human figures and those of animals, and selling them to the black community in Nashville. At one point, a art professor from Nashville was walking through the neighborhood in the story as he saw these sculptures, and he went and talked to Edmondson and struck up a friendship with him and became an enthusiastic supporter of Edmondson's work. And other people in the Nashville arts community began supporting him. And eventually, a photographer named Louise Dahl White, who was a photographer for Harper's Bazaar fashion magazine, in 1937, came to Nashville and photographed him. This is one of her photographs here. Photographed him working on his sculptures and photographed some of the sculptures. She tried to get Harper's to publish them, but William Randolph Hearst, who was the owner of Harper's, was a racist who didn't want to promote Edmondson. But eventually the work piqued the interest of a man named Alfred Barr, who was the president of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and he arranged to have Edmondson's works displayed there. So William Edmondson became the first Black American artist to have his own one-man show at the Museum of Modern Art. And so he continued to create and sell these sculptures, eventually switched to using a chisel so he could do more delicate work. But he continued to do this while working as a janitor in the hospital. And eventually he got his health failed and he stopped sculpting, and he died in 1951. Now, during his lifetime, he was primarily known only in the Nashville area. He wasn't well-known, despite having this display in the show in New York. He really didn't become famous until years after his death. And as this book points out, sadly, his family members, not realizing the greatness of his art, sold off all of his work for just a few bucks. They just, whoever wanted it, they would just sell it. And so his collection became dispersed. But in the decades since then, Edmondson has become, his reputation has steadily improved. He went from being considered a primitive folk artist to being an outsider artist to today he's just considered one of the major American sculptors of the 20th century. Now, this book is actually a poetry book. Elizabeth Spires is a major American poet. She also has written a number of children's books. And what she's done here is she's written 24 poems about Edmondson and his work. And they're accompanied by a series of photographs. Some of these were taken by Louise Dahl White in 1937, and another prominent photographer, Edward Weston, came to Nashville in 1941 and also photographed Edmondson and his work. So there's a combination of those two photographers in here. So let me just show you some of the photographs real quickly, and then I'm going to read one of Spires' poems to you. So here's a picture, a photograph by Dahl White of Edmondson sculpting a human figure there. And then here we have a photograph of boxer. This is his rendition of boxer Jack Johnson. And here we have one of his most ambitious works, which is a bird bath, whose location has now been lost, but it was photographed in 1937, I believe. And then this one is a rendition of Eleanor Roosevelt, who came to Nashville to give a speech, and apparently Edmondson was there to see her. So I'm going to read you this poem real quickly. Again, this is by Elizabeth Spires, and it's entitled Eleanor Roosevelt. The President and I made a stop in Nashville on November 17, 1934. 16 miles of rope held back the cheering crowds along the parade route. We breakfasted at the Hermitage, Andrew Jackson's home place, and then I slipped back to see the slave quarters where his faithful servant, Uncle Alfred, lived out his life. Thank goodness times have changed. But if I have my way, they'll change some more until everyone in this great land of ours has the same rights and opportunities. I've told the president how I feel. He doesn't agree. He doesn't disagree, but believes the nation must go slow. Why, I wonder, why? After all these years of injustice, why must we go slow? Do you know what I remember best about that day? The Jubilee singers at Fisk in black and white regalia singing "Hand Me Down My Silver Trumpet, Gabriel." Mr. Edmondson, were you in the crowd that day? I think you were, because you sculpted me in the overcoat I was wearing, the one with the fur collar. I'll never forget those 30 golden voices singing in jubilation, the crowd of 5,000 joining in. Hand me down my silver trumpet, Gabriel. Hand it down. Throw it down. Any old way to get it down. That stayed with me as we drove away back to our waiting train, headed for Warm Springs, Georgia. And again, this is the sculpture that accompanies that poem. So, if you are interested in African-American art, if you're interested in American sculpture, or if you're a poetry lover or African-American history, you will really enjoy this book. There's some really nice poetry, and the photographs of Edmondson's work are remarkable, and you really learn to appreciate how this self-taught artist became one of the major sculptors in America in the mid-20th century, working almost his entire life in obscurity. The book is I Heard God Talking to Me. The author is Elizabeth Spires. This has been another Man and Great Book Review. Thanks for watching.